They are putting a deep pause on many live-action projects, and even animated ones out there, by the way, in the wake of the public outrage against Snow White, the overall pushback and backlash against Rachel Zegler.
Have you ever watched a major film studio pour millions upon millions of dollars into a project, only to realize that their dream of a surefire blockbuster might be crumbling behind the scenes? That's exactly the scenario swirling around Disney's live-action Snow White. It was supposed to be a triumphant return to one of the studio's most treasured classics, a modern reimagining of the 1937 animated masterpiece that launched the Disney princess phenomenon. Instead, rumors have spread like wildfire about endless reshoots, clashing personalities, and a lead actress who apologized for some head-scratching remarks, but possibly far too late to contain the damage. Viewers and fans have been left to wonder whether the final product will capture the charm of the original or be remembered for the controversies that threatened to sink it before it even reached theaters. Whispers of on-set tension between Rachel Zegler, tapped to embody the iconic Snow White, and Gal Gadot, cast as the evil queen, have dominated chat rooms and social media feeds. What began as a promising production quickly morphed into an ever-expanding drama. Through the twists and turns, including an apology that might have been designed more for damage control than genuine remorse, this adaptation has courted near disaster at every step. But how did everything go sideways? Let's explore the tangled web of events that pushed Disney's big gamble to the brink. When Rachel Zegler was first announced as Disney's newest Snow White, the reaction was electric. She was fresh off a well-received performance in West Side Story, and many saw her as the perfect blend of modern talent and classic princess beauty. Disney, eager to show its commitment to inclusivity, touted her casting as a symbol of the times, an updated representation of an old fairy tale for a new generation. Early press described her as enthusiastic, grateful, and ready to bring a timeless heroine into the 21st century. But not long after the initial wave of excitement, murmurs surfaced that something wasn't quite right. Footage began circulating of Zegler speaking about the 1937 Snow White in ways some fans considered dismissive. She referred to the original film as outdated, bleak, and even implied that she found it scary and not worth revisiting. These comments fueled speculation that she didn't respect the property she'd been chosen to lead. Disney tried to spin the remarks as the benign opinions of a young actress, yet the online world was less forgiving. Social media erupted in fiery debates. Was it acceptable for the new Snow White to criticize the very film that sparked the entire Disney empire of princesses? Initially, the blowback was mild. People complained, but still remained curious about how Zegler would handle the role. Then her statements got more pointed, suggesting that the original storyline was inherently problematic and that the live-action version would skip the love story aspect. Fans began to worry that the classic fairy tale was being upended by modern commentary, shifting from a whimsical romance into an over-politicized narrative. Almost overnight, Zegler went from a praised newcomer to a... Long before the official script was locked, Disney gave behind-the-scenes glimpses of a new, expanded storyline. Greta Gerwig, who had garnered critical acclaim elsewhere, was brought in to help with the screenplay. Fans were cautiously optimistic that a writer known for sharp, character-driven stories could infuse freshness while still honoring the beloved source. Despite that promise, word trickled out that the production was plagued by script inconsistencies and pacing problems right from the start. Insiders whispered that entire sections of the film needed to be rewritten after the initial table reads. Studio executives were reportedly unhappy with the pace, complaining it drifted too far from the original's charm. Multiple reshoots later, production sources claimed the film still felt disjointed. Some sequences were described as overly dark, while others swung wildly into lighthearted territory, creating a tonal imbalance that was not easy to fix. Each round of reshoots brought new costs and more exhaustion for the cast and crew. Schedules were shuffled, budgets ballooned, and rumors said Disney almost considered shelving the project temporarily, sticking it in a metaphorical vault if it became too risky. Yet the filming continued, perhaps driven by the sheer star power involved. This adaptation boasted not only a rising star in Zegler, but also the internationally celebrated Gal Gadot. How could Disney abandon a project featuring Wonder Woman as the evil queen? From the outside, it seemed like a brilliant pairing, the wholesome, sweet persona of Snow White pitted against the fierce, charismatic evil queen. But behind the scenes, tension reportedly crackled between Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot. While nobody on the official team publicly confirmed a feud, multiple accounts indicated they had starkly different artistic visions. Gadot, known for bringing strong female characters to life, allegedly enjoyed fleshing out the evil queen with a darker, more morally complex edge. She improvised lines, suggesting layers of backstory to make the queen's motivations more sympathetic, or at least more fascinating. Zegler, however, was said to be worried that too many creative liberties might overshadow the emotional core of Snow White's journey. In her view, this was still the protagonist's story, and leaning too heavily into the villain's viewpoint could dilute the film's central themes. Publicly, both actresses smiled when asked about the film, but glimpses of friction seeped through. Fans noticed that while Gadot praised the original fairy tale's timelessness, Zegler continued expressing ambivalence toward older Disney material. Their contradictory remarks formed a swirl of speculation. Would the evil queen overshadow Snow White in her own movie? Had the new Snow White truly embraced the spirit of the 1937 classic, or was she determined to remodel it entirely? As filming progressed, there was great anticipation around the third act fortress showdown. Rumor held that it would be the climactic set piece, a grand, looming castle where Snow White and her allies confront the evil queen in a visually spectacular sequence. The production poured resources into intricate sets, elaborate costumes, and carefully choreographed stunts. According to some insiders, filming this scene was so complicated it took weeks of night shoots and multiple script passes. Yet after all that effort, the fortress scene was reportedly scrapped. Disney Suits, alarmed by the reshoots and continuity concerns, found the footage too disjointed. By that point, the film had gone through so many rewrites that much of the fortress scene no longer meshed with the rest of the storyline. Continuity errors abounded. Characters who had changed costumes or hair between reshoots, plot points that no longer made sense due to earlier rewrites, and an overall mismatch in tone. For Zegler, losing the fortress set piece felt like a blow. Reports claimed she believed it showcased her strongest performance, highlighting Snow White's transformation from a timid girl to a self-assured hero. By cutting it, the production potentially undermined the depth Zegler had hoped to bring to the character, especially if viewers already questioned her devotion to the role. On top of that, tensions on set flared. Cast and crew who spent endless hours perfecting that sequence were frustrated, wondering if their work had been for nothing. While the fortress subplot was disappearing from the final cut, public scrutiny of Rachel Zegler's stance on the original Snow White continued intensifying. Her earlier statements were dissected and criticized on social media. Disney, fearing a backlash that could hurt its classic brand, may have quietly nudged her to address the uproar. At last, Zegler issued a new statement, an apology of sorts, professing respect for the 1937 movie. She insisted she never intended to disrespect the story, praising elements like the legendary songs and the timeless innocence of the character. Many fans welcomed the sentiment. After all, acknowledging the importance of a cultural milestone seemed like a step in the right direction. But for every person who deemed it sincere, there was another who dismissed it as pure damage control. Skeptics argued Zegler was only backtracking because negative headlines were piling up. Some even accused her of hypocrisy, pointing out that her apology felt far too polished and choreographed, right as production woes became public knowledge. Within the studio, morale was impacted by the swirling controversies. Executives worried that Zegler's remarks, both her initial dismissal of the classic film and her subsequent attempt at reconciliation, would overshadow the adaptation. If fans believed the leading lady didn't truly love the story, would they still flock to theaters? Meanwhile, insiders muttered that the relationship between Zegler and Gadot had become so strained, no carefully worded apology would change the tense atmosphere. As rumors of on-set discord spilled over into the public sphere, Disney made a drastic call, pushed the release date from 2024 to 2025. Officially, the announcement was couched in language about ensuring the film's quality. Unofficially, talk circulated that the studio was buying time to fix structural issues, attempt new reshoots if necessary, and pray the controversy cooled off. A large-scale premiere had been planned in the United Kingdom, complete with red carpet appearances by both Zegler and Gadot. Industry watchers expected this event to drum up massive publicity. Then, shockingly, it was canceled. Some said that Disney execs feared the press would pounce on the rumored rift between the two leads, turning the premiere into a spectacle of awkward questioning. Others speculated that the stars themselves resisted appearing together, wary of fueling even more rumors or letting slip any unplanned comments that could reignite the backlash. In the meantime, additional script adjustments trickled in. Unconfirmed reports indicated that the final act was being revised again, pivoting away from the fortress battle to something smaller and more character-focused, potentially to highlight the emotional journey of Snow White and the Evil Queen. Fans questioned whether that shift might create an anticlimactic ending, especially for a film that promised a fresh spin on the original classic. But Disney was determined, better a coherent, smaller finale than a messy big sequence that pulled the film in conflicting directions. By the time new release schedules were set, the public narrative around Snow White was less about the remake's potential magic and more about who said what and why. Tabloid-style headlines trumpeted the drama between the leads, while film forums debated whether a young actress's disrespectful-sounding remarks about an old cartoon could really sink a project of this magnitude. Mixed into all this intrigue was the question, would Zegler's apology actually help quell the storm of negativity? An insider alleged that Zegler and Godot had barely spoken toward the end of principal photography, except when the scene absolutely required them to. The apology didn't ease the friction. If anything, it highlighted the gulf between them. Godot, widely admired for her earlier roles, rarely commented on the controversy, seemingly preferring to focus on her craft. Zegler's own retraction seemed to revolve around general statements about respecting the source material, but never specifically addressed criticisms that she actively disliked the original. Those who witnessed the tension firsthand claimed that Zegler's frustration with the toned-down third act and the removal of the fortress scene only heightened her sense of isolation. She had banked on that grand final sequence to prove she could evolve Snow White into a dynamic modern heroine. Now, her big moment was gone, and all people wanted to discuss were her inflammatory interviews and last-minute apologies. Speculation buzzed that Disney might even reduce promotional appearances for Zegler, instead shining the spotlight on the film's lush visuals, costumes, and supporting cast. A rumor circulated that any live press events might minimize the possibility of open Q&A sessions to avoid a barrage of questions about the behind-the-scenes drama or further commentary from Zegler that could reignite controversy. It's a precarious tightrope. A major release typically relies heavily on the lead actress for promotion, yet the lead actress in this scenario was increasingly viewed as a liability. In many ways, the Snow White turmoil served as a microcosm of bigger issues at Disney. The studio had been criticized for rehashing old classics without capturing the original magic. Other live-action remakes, like Mulan, had also sparked controversies related to casting choices, tone changes, or massive rewrites that alienated fans. But this Snow White fiasco seemed particularly fraught. Some industry analysts suggested that if a cornerstone property like Snow White stumbled in the eyes of viewers, especially with such intense negative buzz, Disney might scale back its live-action remake ambitions. The formula of take an animated classic, cast talented people, add a modern twist had worked in certain cases, but a big misfire here could force the studio to reevaluate. Did tampering with iconic stories risk more backlash than reward? Was it wise to hype progressive changes if the end product alienated the loyal fans that originally fell in love with these characters? For Rachel Zegler herself, the stakes were immense. Previously seen as a bright new star, she risked developing a reputation as difficult or out of sync with fan expectations. Even if her performances in other films had garnered critical praise, Hollywood can be unforgiving when an actor embroils a big-budget project in controversy. Some insiders posited that studios would be reluctant to cast her in similarly high-profile roles if Snow White failed to turn a profit. Whether her apology was sincere or merely strategic, it might not matter if the box office returns were dismal. Gal Gadot, while not entirely unscathed, had a more established track record to bolster her. Critics predicted she could weather the storm if the film underperformed. After all, her brand was already global, courtesy of earlier blockbuster successes. Still, nobody wants to be attached to a potential flop, especially not one overshadowed by talk of star disputes, excessive reshoots, and questionable statements by a co-lead. Despite all the drama, there's still a chance this Snow White adaptation could surprise audiences in a positive way. Movie history is littered with films that overcame chaotic productions to become beloved classics, or at least cult favorites. The question is whether the final cut can weave together a consistent, compelling story that resonates with both new audiences and diehard fans of the 1937 original. If the reworked ending, combined with the earlier reshoots, successfully addresses pacing issues and the original's perceived outdated elements, the film might strike a balance between nostalgia and modern flair. Indeed, some viewers are open to fresh interpretations as long as the core themes, kindness, hope, and perseverance, remain intact. Zegler's portrayal could be redeemed if she delivers a truly breathtaking performance that convinces audiences she respects the role. Her apology, then, might be reinterpreted as a genuine shift in attitude. On the other hand, if the controversies overshadow the content, or if the script's constant rewrites stripped it of emotional depth, the film could become a cautionary tale. In that case, critics might harp on the behind-the-scenes troubles, analyzing every news story beat for signs of studio meddling. Fan communities, already wary of Zegler's remarks, might refuse to let the apology go, continuing to accuse her of having no real attachment to the legacy. The risk for Disney is that negative word of mouth could hamper the movie's performance, overshadowing even the best marketing efforts. So here we are, waiting for Snow White 2025. A production that has racked up staggering budgets, endured multiple script overhauls, lost a massive action sequence, and been put on hold for a year to dodge the cascade of scandals. Amid it all, Rachel Zegler stands at the center, having issued an apology that some regard as a genuine attempt to correct course, and others deem far too little, much too late. Will the final product deliver the whimsical enchantment that turned the original Snow White into a cinematic legend? Or will this adaptation fade into history as the version that ignited more uproar than wonder? It's a precarious balancing act. For every voice calling for open-mindedness in reimagining Snow White's story, another voice demands respect for a film that, despite its age, remains a cherished piece of popular culture. No one will have a definitive answer until audiences finally get to see what survived the rewrites, the Fortress fiasco, and the reported clash of egos. Maybe the film will manage to fuse the best of both worlds, a modernized princess with a nod to her classic origins, while offering a freshly menacing evil queen who draws new fans into the story. Or maybe the negativity swirling around Zegler's stance on the original and the swirling tension with Godot will linger, fueling yet more harsh critiques once it opens. In an era where fan reactions can make or break a blockbuster, Disney is gambling on the hope that the magic of its brand still carries enough weight to sway any doubters. In the grand scheme, Snow White 2025 reflects the risks of trying to reinvent an iconic fairy tale for contemporary audiences. It also underscores the importance of maintaining goodwill, both on set and with the public. A single apology can't erase months of mistrust, but it might inch the narrative toward reconciliation. If the end product delivers a genuine homage to the cherished classic. Then again, if the film fails to enchant, the story might be remembered for exactly the controversies it tried so hard to dodge. Either way, it serves as a fascinating saga in Hollywood history, a mix of big ambitions, clashing personalities, and the delicate line between honoring tradition and pushing boundaries.